Break free from fear. How 6 Buddhist teachings can transform your life. Introduction. What if you were never afraid again? Imagine waking up tomorrow and no longer feeling paralyzed by fear. Imagine facing uncertainty with calm, embracing challenges with clarity, and meeting your life exactly as it is, with unshakable inner peace. It might sound impossible, especially in today's world, where fear is everywhere. From news headlines to social media, from personal crises to global instability, fear has become a constant companion for many of us. We fear losing our jobs, our health, our relationships, our dreams. Sometimes, we even fear our own thoughts. But what if fear didn't have to control you? More than 2,500 years ago, the Buddha taught that fear, like all mental suffering, is something we can understand and ultimately transcend. His teachings were not mystical doctrines, but practical insights that have helped millions cultivate courage, resilience, and wisdom. In this article, we'll explore 6 powerful Buddhist lessons that will help you disarm your fear and change your life. These aren't quick fixes or motivational quotes. They are deep principles rooted in ancient wisdom, supported by modern psychology, and made personal through real-life stories and reflections. You'll learn how fear arises, why it persists, and how you can meet it with insight instead of resistance. Along the way, I'll share examples, ideas, and tools that go beyond the original teachings, because to truly transform fear, we must not only understand it, but also live differently. Let's begin this journey together. Lesson 1. Embrace impermanence. Nothing stays the same, and that's your power. This too shall pass. Ancient Buddhist proverb. One of the most central Buddhist teachings is anicca, or impermanence. The Buddha taught that all things, our bodies, emotions, thoughts, relationships, and even fears, are temporary. Nothing remains fixed. This may seem obvious, yet we often live as if things will never change. We cling to jobs, people, routines, or identities because they provide a sense of safety. And when change inevitably comes, we panic. Fear is resistance to change. Many fears come from the illusion of permanence. We fear losing our health, status, or loved ones. But these things were never permanent to begin with. Our suffering deepens when we try to hold on. Let's say you're in a relationship and you feel insecure. You start fearing that the other person might leave. That fear grows the more you try to control the relationship. You're not just afraid of losing them, you're afraid of change itself. The Buddha's insight? Change is not the problem. Attachment is. When we learn to accept impermanence, fear begins to dissolve. We realize that just as joy is fleeting, so is pain. Just as night follows day, our difficulties will also pass. A story of letting go. I once knew a man named Daniel who lost everything during a business collapse: his company, his savings, and his confidence. For months, he lived in fear of the future. But one day, while meditating in a small Zen temple, he heard the phrase, "No snowflake ever falls in the wrong place." It struck him. His downfall wasn't permanent. It was part of a cycle. Over the next year, Daniel rebuilt, not the same business, but a new life, rooted in simplicity and service. He later said, "Losing everything freed me from fear. I learned that nothing I had could define me." Practice, reflect on change around you. Watch the sky change from morning to night. Reflect on how emotions rise and fall. Remember a fear you once had that no longer exists. Every moment is proof that impermanence is real and that you don't need to fear it. You can trust it. Lesson 2. See the illusion of fear, understanding the mind's most convincing trick. Fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth. Pema Chodron. We all know fear. It creeps in before a big decision, paralyzes us when we're about to speak our truth, and whispers warnings when life demands courage. Fear often feels real, urgent, and overwhelming. But what if most of our fear isn't actually real? One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is that much of what we suffer from isn't external, it's fabricated by the mind. And fear is perhaps the mind's most elaborate illusion. Fear is not reality, it's a projection. Let's get this straight. Fear feels real. But the Buddha taught that we must go deeper than appearances. He encouraged his followers to question their experiences, to look beneath the surface of emotions and thoughts. What we call fear is often just a story, built on what might happen, not what is happening. You might think, if I try this, I'll fail. If I speak up, I'll be rejected. If I open up, I'll get hurt. Notice something? These thoughts are not facts. They are predictions. And 90% of the time, they never come true. Fear is the mind rehearsing failure in advance. It creates an imaginary future and reacts to it as if it's already real. The psychology of imaginary fear. In modern neuroscience, this is known as anticipatory anxiety. Your brain imagines a threat, and your body reacts as if it's happening now. That's why you sweat, your heart races, your mouth dries. But in reality, nothing is happening yet. The amygdala, fear center of the brain, doesn't distinguish between real danger and imagined danger. That's why a stressful thought can produce the same fight or flight response as a physical threat. The Buddha didn't have MRI scans, but he had direct insight into the nature of the mind. He taught that when we see thoughts for what they are, impermanent and not self, we begin to liberate ourselves from suffering. The cliffside metaphor, seeing through the story. Imagine you're standing on a safe platform at the edge of a high cliff. You're in no danger. There's a secure railing. Yet your knees tremble and your body tenses. Why? Because your mind is visualizing falling. It's replaying every movie you've seen about cliffs. It's whispering, what if you slip? But that what if is a lie. It's not a reality. You're safe, but your mind isn't convinced. This is how fear works. It takes the unknown and fills it with the worst case scenario. But here's the truth. Fear is a lens, not a mirror. It doesn't reflect reality. It distorts it. Real story, the artist who hid for 10 years. A close friend of mine, Sarah, is an incredibly gifted painter. But for 10 years, she didn't show a single piece of her work to the public. Why? Fear. She feared rejection, criticism, embarrassment. Every time she considered applying for a gallery show, her inner voice told her, they'll laugh at your work. You're not talented enough. It's safer to stay quiet. None of this was true. Her art was stunning, emotional, deeply original. But fear built a prison, and she lived inside it. One day, she joined a Buddhist mindfulness retreat where the teacher said, fear is not your enemy. It's your ego's way of saying, don't grow. Stay safe. Stay the same. That cracked something open. Sarah began questioning her fear. She realized it wasn't protecting her, it was limiting her. Slowly, she started sharing her work. First on social media, then at a local exhibition. Now, years later, her art has been featured internationally. And more importantly, she's free. Her biggest insight? Fear was never the problem. Believing it was real, that was the problem. From identification to observation, you are not your fear. The Buddha taught that liberation comes not from fighting the mind, but from understanding it. When fear arises, we usually identify with it. I am scared. I can't do this. This is who I am. But that's an illusion. The truth is, you are not the fear. You are the awareness behind it. This distinction changes everything. When you stop saying, I am afraid, and instead say, fear is arising, you shift from identity to observation. You go from being a prisoner of fear to being the witness of it. And in that witnessing, fear loses its grip. Practice facing fear with awareness. The next time fear shows up, try this 3-step process. 1. Pause and breathe. Don't react. Just stop and take a deep breath. 2. Label it. Say, this is fear. Naming it gives you distance. 3. Investigate. Ask yourself, oh, is this fear based on actual danger or imagined future? Oh, what story is my mind telling me? Oh, can I let this fear exist without needing to act on it? You may still feel afraid. That's okay. But you won't be controlled by the fear anymore. You will become bigger than it. A final insight: fear is a signpost, not a barrier. Here's something that changed my life. Fear often shows up right before something important. When you're about to grow, expand, or step into something new, fear appears. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're crossing the threshold of your comfort zone. Fear isn't always a stop sign. Sometimes it's a green light. Let me say that again. Fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes it means go. You're moving toward truth, toward expansion, toward authenticity. The fear says, this matters. So don't run from it. Walk through it with your eyes open and your heart steady. Lesson 3. Cultivate mindfulness. Anchor yourself in the now. Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The Dhammapada. If fear is the illusion, then mindfulness is the flashlight that exposes it. In Buddhist teachings, mindfulness, known as sati in Pali, is the practice of being fully present in the moment, without judgment or distraction. It is the very heart of the spiritual path, and in the context of fear, it becomes your most powerful ally. Because here's the thing, fear thrives in time, but mindfulness lives only in the now. Fear lives in the past and future. Most of our fears do not originate in the present moment. They're rooted in memories of what hurt us yesterday, projections of what might go wrong tomorrow. We replay our past mistakes, anticipate future catastrophes, and build entire stories of suffering before anything has actually happened. The mind races between timelines, weaving a narrative of danger and failure. But rarely is that danger present right here, right now. Mindfulness interrupts this pattern. When we're mindful, we're no longer chasing thoughts or running from shadows. We come home to our breath, our body, our senses. And fear, without fuel from the past or future, begins to fade. The science behind it. Modern neuroscience now supports what the Buddha taught over 2,500 years ago. When we practice mindfulness, the prefrontal cortex, the rational, calm part of the brain, is activated, while the amygdala, responsible for fear and threat detection, becomes less reactive. Even just 10 minutes a day of mindfulness practice can reduce anxiety, lower stress hormones, and increase emotional resilience. In essence, mindfulness doesn't erase fear, it gives you the space not to be overwhelmed by it. Mindfulness in action, the inner pause. Let me share a story from my own life. A few years ago, I was going through a stressful period at work. One morning, I received a harsh email from a supervisor that immediately triggered anxiety. My chest tightened, heart pounded, thoughts spiraled. What if I lose my job? What if I've ruined everything? What if I can't recover from this? I was about to type an emotional reply, but I stopped. I remembered my practice. I stood up, walked outside, sat down on a bench, and just breathed. I didn't try to think positive. I didn't argue with my fear. I simply brought attention to the rise and fall of my breath. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Gradually, the panic lost its grip. The email was still there, but I was no longer drowning in reactivity. I responded calmly, professionally, and everything worked out. That day, I didn't avoid fear, I met it with presence. And it changed the outcome. Why mindfulness works against fear. Let's break down exactly how mindfulness disrupts fear. 1. It separates you from the thought. Instead of being in the fear, you observe it. I'm noticing anxiety arise is a very different inner message than I am anxious. 2. It returns you to your body. Fear often pulls you into your head, into loops of worry and prediction. Mindfulness brings you back to the physical world, your breath, your feet on the ground, the sounds around you. 3. It interrupts the autopilot. Fear thrives on repetition. Mindfulness is a break in the loop, a pause in the script. That pause is where your power lives. Real life story, a veteran's return to the present. Miguel was a former soldier dealing with PTSD. Loud noises and crowded places triggered intense flashbacks and fear responses. Traditional therapy helped, but he felt disconnected, always on alert, always afraid. Then he began learning mindful walking. Each day, he would slowly walk in his backyard, barefoot, paying attention to every step. Left foot, grass, breath in, right foot, wind, breath out. At first, he thought it was silly. But gradually, something changed. His mind stopped racing. He felt grounded, anchored, not in the battlefield of his memories, but in the reality of now. Miguel shared, "The past still lives in me. But now I have a way to come home to myself." Mindfulness didn't erase his trauma, but it gave him a tool to face his fear with gentleness and clarity. And that changed everything. Practices to cultivate mindfulness in the face of fear. You don't need a meditation cushion or a silent retreat to begin. These simple practices can help you stay anchored during moments of anxiety or fear. 1. Breath awareness, 3-minute anchor. Sit or stand. Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. Repeat for 3 minutes. With each exhale, silently say, "I am here." 2. Name the emotion. When fear arises, pause and say, "This is fear." Labeling the emotion creates distance and awareness. 3. Grounding through the senses. Notice 5 things you can see. 4 you can touch. 3 you can hear. 2 you can smell. 1 you can taste. This brings your mind out of thought and into the body. 4. Compassionate self-talk. Place a hand on your heart. Say to yourself, "It's okay to feel afraid. I'm here for you." Speaking kindly to yourself rewires the inner response to fear. Mindfulness isn't a fix, it's a way of being. Many people try mindfulness for a day or 2 and say, "It didn't work." But mindfulness isn't a pill, it's a practice. It's about showing up for yourself again and again. It's about choosing presence over panic, awareness over autopilot. The more you do it, the more space you create. And in that space, fear shrinks. Final reflection, the eye of the storm. There's a Zen saying, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." Mindfulness won't stop the world from being chaotic. It won't eliminate uncertainty. But it will help you stand in the center of the storm with stillness. It gives you the ability to say, "Yes, fear is here. But so am I." And that awareness, that gentle return to now, is where your deepest strength lives. Lesson 4. Understand the nature of suffering. You are not alone in fear. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Buddhist proverb. If fear were a tree, suffering would be its root. To transform fear, we must look beyond surface emotions and ask, where is this fear really coming from? The Buddha's answer, in a word, is dukkha, a Pali term often translated as suffering, but more accurately described as the unsatisfactoriness of life. Dukkha isn't just about obvious pain. It's a subtle, underlying unease that arises from clinging, resistance, and the illusion that life should always go our way. And fear is one of its most common expressions. Fear is a form of suffering. It may seem odd to think of fear as a kind of suffering. But think about it. Fear constricts the body. It clouds the mind. It isolates the heart. Fear pulls us away from presence and peace. It keeps us in a state of psychological contraction, where we're constantly trying to protect ourselves from what might happen. That's suffering. And in the Buddhist view, suffering arises not just from what happens to us, but from how we relate to what happens. The human condition, you are not alone. The Buddha's first noble truth is simple: there is suffering in life. But there's a hidden gift in that truth, universality. Fear, pain, anxiety, these aren't personal defects. They're part of being human. When you realize that everyone experiences fear in some form, rich or poor, young or old, successful or struggling, you stop feeling so alone. In fact, that very recognition can be healing. A story from the hospital waiting room. Years ago, I sat in a hospital waiting room while a close friend underwent emergency surgery. My hands were cold, my mind raced, and I was paralyzed by fear. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. But then I looked around. There was a father holding his child's toy, staring blankly at the floor. A woman praying with her eyes closed. An elderly couple holding hands tightly, whispering to each other. In that moment, it hit me, we're all afraid. We're all hoping, grieving, bracing, loving. And suddenly, my fear felt shared. Not lighter, but somehow softer. Less isolating. That day, I didn't conquer fear. But I was no longer trapped inside it alone. And that made all the difference. From isolation to compassion. When you think your fear is unique, you feel isolated. When you realize your fear is universal, you open the door to compassion for yourself and for others. This is the heart of what the Buddha taught. Just as I experience fear, so do others. Just as I long for peace, so does the world. This shift is not just spiritual, it's neurological. Compassion activates the parasympathetic nervous system, helping you calm down. It moves you out of fear mode and into connection mode. Instead of spiraling into why me, you begin to feel I'm with others in this. That shift can be profoundly healing. Insight: fear is not personal, it's patterned. You are not uniquely broken. You are deeply human. This realization may sound simple, but it can save lives. I once worked with a teenager named Leon who was overwhelmed with fear of failure. Every time he got a B instead of an A, he spiraled into shame. He believed something was wrong with him, that other people handled pressure better, that he was weak. Over time, through mindfulness and study of Buddhist teachings, Leon began to see his fear as part of a shared human experience. He learned to say to himself, "This is fear. It's here. It's not just mine. Others feel this too." He stopped seeing fear as proof of inadequacy and started seeing it as an opportunity to meet himself with kindness. Applying the teaching, shared humanity as medicine for fear. When you feel fear, try this simple but powerful practice. The common humanity reflection. Close your eyes and place a hand on your heart. Say silently, "Oh, others have felt this too. Oh, this fear is not unique to me. Oh, may I meet it with kindness." You might even imagine someone else in the world, right now, feeling a similar fear. Perhaps they're applying for a job, going through a divorce, facing an illness. Imagine reaching out with compassion. That connection doesn't eliminate fear, but it shifts your relationship to it, from shame to solidarity. A hidden gift, fear as a doorway to insight. Fear teaches us something important, where we still suffer. Instead of judging yourself for being afraid, ask, what am I afraid to lose? What am I clinging to? What part of me still needs healing? These questions don't make fear vanish, but they transform it into a teacher rather than a tormentor. In Buddhism, suffering is not a dead end, it's a doorway. The Buddha never said life should be painless. He said that understanding suffering is the beginning of liberation. Lesson 5, let go of attachment, freedom comes from release. The root of suffering is attachment. The Buddha. Fear is not always about what's happening, it's often about what we might lose. The fear of losing status, relationships, youth, control, success, or even our self-image is deeply tied to one of the most central Buddhist teachings, tanha, which means craving, clinging, or attachment. The Buddha taught that we suffer because we get attached to things that are impermanent, external, and out of our control. And when we attach ourselves to those things, fear is born, because deep down, we know they can't last. Why attachment fuels fear? Attachment isn't just about material possessions. It's emotional, psychological, even spiritual. We attach to people. I can't be happy without them. Identity, I am my job title. Outcomes, if I fail this, my life is over. Beliefs, this must happen or I'll fall apart. But all of these things are unstable by nature. When we rely on them for security, fear becomes our default mode of existence because on some level, we always know this could end. So we try to hold tighter. And the tighter we grip, the more anxious we become. Letting go is not about rejection. It's about liberation. Letting go is not giving up. A common misconception is that non-attachment means apathy or detachment from life. But Buddhism teaches non-attachment is not indifference. It is engagement without grasping. You can love deeply, work hard, dream big, but without depending on any of it for your inner peace. You hold with open hands. You give without demand. You live without clinging. And from that space comes a kind of fearless joy that cannot be taken from you. A story of clinging and courage. Let me tell you about Elena, a successful entrepreneur who built a tech company from scratch. Her identity was wrapped around her work. She was the CEO, the visionary, the success story. When market shifts forced her to shut down the company, she was crushed. But what really broke her wasn't the business loss, it was the identity loss. If I'm not this, she asked, then who am I? She spiraled into fear of irrelevance, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. Then, during a long retreat in Thailand, she encountered a Buddhist monk who told her something she never forgot. What falls away is never who you truly are. It is only what you were clinging to. That line pierced through her grief. Over time, she began to untangle her identity from her role. She started teaching entrepreneurship to disadvantaged youth. She rebuilt, not her old empire, but a new self rooted in service, not success. She later said, "Letting go of who I thought I had to be was the most terrifying and liberating thing I've ever done." Why control is an illusion. One major source of fear is the illusion of control. We think, if I plan enough, I'll be safe. If I control every detail, nothing will go wrong. If I keep them close, they'll never leave. But no matter how much we try, life will surprise us. Control is a fragile armor. What if, instead of trying to control the river, you learned how to float? What if surrender wasn't weakness, but wisdom? The Buddha taught that peace doesn't come from controlling life, it comes from aligning with it. Practice living with open hands. Here are ways to begin loosening the grip of attachment and letting fear fade with it. 1. Reflect on what you're clinging to. Ask yourself, what outcome am I afraid to lose? Is it a job? A relationship? A version of yourself? Write it down. Name it. Naming helps disarm its power. 2. Affirm inner stability. Say aloud or in your journal, even if this changes, I remain whole. I trust in my ability to respond, not control. Letting go is safe. 3. Non-attachment meditation. Visualize yourself holding sand in your hand. As you squeeze it, it slips away. As you open your hand, it rests gently. Let this image guide your day, open, relaxed, trusting. Fear shrinks as attachment fades. Have you ever noticed how free children can be? How they play, laugh, cry, and move on without clinging. Children don't yet carry the weight of attachment we adults do. They remind us that we were once unafraid to feel, to fail, to try again. As we grow, we accumulate identities, expectations, attachments. And with them comes fear. But the spiritual journey is not about becoming someone, it's about remembering who you were before the fear took root. Non-attachment is not just a practice, it's a return to your original freedom. Lesson 6. Cultivate patience, learn to trust the timing of life. Adopt the pace of nature, her secret is patience. Ralph Waldo Emerson. With patience, everything is possible. Buddhist proverb. In a world that celebrates speed, efficiency, and instant results, patience may seem outdated, something for those who have time to spare. But in the Buddhist tradition, patience is not weakness. It is a form of strength, a kind of spiritual courage that allows you to sit with uncertainty without collapsing into fear. Because fear often arises not from the unknown itself, but from our resistance to waiting, to not knowing, to the discomfort of being in between. Why fear and impatience are linked? Most fear is rooted in urgency. I need to know how this ends. I need to fix this now. I can't handle this for much longer. This is where fear lives, in the impatience with the present and the demand for a quick resolution. But life unfolds on its own schedule. Healing, success, love, growth, all come in their own time. When we lack patience, we feel out of control. When we cultivate patience, we become rooted in trust, not necessarily in outcomes, but in our own ability to navigate whatever comes. The Buddha's view on patience. In the Pali Canon, Khanti, patience or forbearance, is considered one of the 10 perfections, essential virtues for awakening. It's not just waiting, it's how you wait. It means enduring difficulty without resentment and being with discomfort without running from it. It's the ability to stay present during life's most uncertain and vulnerable moments and not let fear dictate your actions. Story: a mother's journey through illness. Anna was a single mother whose 7-year-old son was diagnosed with a rare illness. The doctors couldn't give her a timeline, only a vague sense of uncertainty. For months, she lived on edge, afraid of every symptom, every delay in treatment. One day, during a meditation class, the teacher said, "Fear wants a timeline, but the soul needs presence." Anna began practicing short daily meditations, focusing only on her breath and the moment in front of her. She learned not to project into the future, not to panic when answers didn't come. "I still felt fear," she later said, "but it no longer ran my life. I learned to stay grounded, even in the unknown." Her son recovered slowly. But the deeper recovery was hers, the realization that patience gave her peace, even when circumstances didn't. What patience really teaches us. 1. You can survive uncertainty. You may not like not knowing, but you can handle it. Patience reminds you that your nervous system, your soul, and your heart are stronger than you think. 2. You don't need to fix everything right now. Some fears come from the compulsion to act, right now, immediately. But not every problem needs a solution today. Some things simply need time, space, and quiet attention. 3. Discomfort is not the enemy. When we lack patience, discomfort feels unbearable. But when we become patient with discomfort, it becomes tolerable, then familiar, and eventually transformative. Practice, training in patience. You can begin cultivating patience with small steps. 1. Sit with the waiting. Next time you're stuck in traffic or a slow queue, don't distract yourself. Use the moment to breathe. Feel your body. Observe your thoughts. 2. Allow space before reacting. When fear arises, pause for 3 deep breaths before responding. Give yourself the gift of space between stimulus and action. 3. Affirm your inner endurance. Silently repeat, "This moment is enough. I can sit with what is. I trust the unfolding of life." Patience with yourself. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of patience is self-patience. We are often our harshest critics. "I should be over this by now. Why am I still afraid? I'm failing at healing." But spiritual growth is not linear. Progress isn't a straight line. And fear, like grief or pain, moves in waves, not checklists. Be gentle with yourself. Forgive yourself for needing time. Healing isn't something you do, it's something you allow. A final reflection: the bamboo and the oak. In a storm, an oak tree may snap, but a bamboo bends. Patience is like bamboo. It doesn't resist the wind, it moves with it, bends with it, and survives. It's not rigid, but neither is it weak. It is deeply resilient. Fear, when met with resistance, becomes unbearable. Fear, when met with patience, becomes a teacher. Conclusion: from fear to freedom, the inner revolution begins now. Fear is not your enemy. It is your invitation. An invitation to pause, to listen, and to come home to yourself. Over the past 6 teachings, we've walked through the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, filtered through modern life, raw emotion, and personal transformation. We've seen that fear is not something to be destroyed, but something to be understood, embraced, and eventually transcended. Let's return to the 6 lessons, not just as ideas, but as pathways out of fear. What lies beyond fear? Peace, clarity, purpose, power. But not the kind of power that dominates others. The power to meet life as it is. To say, yes, I see the fear. And I choose to walk anyway. To be patient in chaos. To be compassionate in darkness. To be still in a world that never stops. This is the power of the awakened heart. A closing reflection, the seed within you. The Buddha once said, "As a lotus rises from the mud, so too can a person rise from their suffering." Fear is the mud. Messy, uncomfortable, and unavoidable. But inside that mud lies the seed of awakening. You are not broken. You are becoming. Each time you face your fear with awareness. Each time you breathe instead of react. Each time you choose presence over panic. You are watering that seed. And one day, maybe without even realizing it, you will look around and see. You are no longer living in fear. You are living in freedom. Your journey doesn't end here. This article is not the end, it's a beginning. Take one lesson. Any one. Practice it today. Not perfectly. Not forever. Just today. Reflect on impermanence. Sit with your fear. Breathe with intention. Let go of one expectation. Offer kindness to someone else. Wait patiently for what's meant for you. And then do it again tomorrow. Because transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in thousands of small ones. You don't need to be fearless to change your life. You just need to be present, aware, and willing. The rest will come. You are more powerful than your fear. You are more sacred than your suffering. You are more free than you've ever imagined. Walk gently. Walk wisely. And keep walking.